right. Well, it is 4 p.m. on August 15th, 2023, and this is the City of Iowa City work session. So I want to welcome everyone in the room and all the counselors. So we're going to start with item number 1, with a presentation and discussion of amendments to Title 14, zoning to improve housing choice, increase housing supply, and encourage affordability. And welcome, Ann.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. Ann Russett with Neighborhood and Development Services. Tonight we're going to share with you a presentation that we gave to the Planning and Zoning Commission on August 2nd. I'm going to kick off the presentation with a little background, and then Kirk is going to get into some more details. Just a heads up, we have a lot to cover. This presentation is about 45 minutes. This slide shows a general timeline of how we got where we are today. It started with the City Council adopting its first Affordable Housing Action Plan in 2016. The plan identified 15 action steps, including changes to zoning regulations, and the changes to the zoning regulations were the only action item from that plan that haven't been completed. In 2019, the city adopted a fair housing choice study, which reviewed impediments to accessing housing because of protected class, such as race, gender, or disability, as codified in the Federal Fair Housing Act. This study included recommended actions to affirmatively further fair housing based on extensive public input, such as targeted feedback from stakeholder interviews, focus groups, a fair housing survey, public events, and a public adoption process. One of the most significant fair housing issues identified was a lack of affordable rental housing. An improved housing choice was one of the many strategies recommended to help address this issue. The city updated its Affordable Housing Action Plan in 2022 to build off previous efforts in support of affordable housing. A number of public input sessions were held, including a survey, general outreach activities such as National Night Out, and targeted stakeholder outreach meetings and other events. And then at the end of 2022, the City Council adopted the strategic plan. One of the action steps included in the strategic plan is advancing prioritized recommendations from the 2022 Affordable Housing Action Plan. We've also had several meetings with the Planning and Zoning Commission, which started in February of 23, where we presented an initial summary of the proposed amendments that we'll be detailing tonight. In April, we presented the results of the 2022 residential development analysis for the city, which shows that residential growth is not keeping pace with demand. We had additional meetings in July and August where staff presented the proposed changes in more detail, and then at their meeting on August 2nd, the Commission recommended approval of the proposed changes, with the exception of the changes related to accessory apartments. Housing affordability is a complex issue, and there's no one solution. There are many factors that influence affordability: income, educational opportunities, cost of various necessities such as health care and child care. Housing supply also impacts affordability, and our community is growing. However, housing supply is not meeting the demand generated by the growth. When thinking about housing affordability, there is a role for zoning. Zoning regulations can restrict development and act as a barrier to creating a diverse housing stock, or it can support and allow a diversity of housing options for our community. We are proposing amendments to the code that help ensure we have a zoning code that doesn't act as a barrier, but instead allows and encourages a diversity of housing types. The goals of the proposed amendments include increasing housing supply to meet demand, increasing a diversity of housing options to improve housing choice by removing barriers for housing types that generally cost less than single-family detached homes, such as townhomes, duplexes, and accessory apartments. We also want to incentivize the development of income-restricted affordable housing through density bonuses and other tools. We want to address fair housing issues to ensure persons with disabilities have equal access to housing, and we want to implement the action items that are included in our adopted plans. Again, there are multiple plans that support the proposed changes. This includes the IC 2030 Comprehensive Plan. The proposed amendments align with the adopted land use policy direction, as well as the other plans that I've already mentioned. As for the strategic plan, the proposed amendments are tied to the city's core value for racial equity, social justice, and human rights, with an effort to remove and address systemic barriers present in all facets of city government, including land use decisions. Also, housing in neighborhoods impact area encourages updating the zoning code to encourage compact neighborhoods with diverse housing types and land uses, and addressing the unique needs of vulnerable populations. And lastly, the Council's action plan does recommend advancing the prioritized recommendations from the 2022 Affordable Housing Action Plan. So with that, I will turn it over to Kirk, who's going to get into the details.
Thank you, Ann. Kirk Lehman, Associate Planner. I'm going to try and be both detailed and brief, and I will do my best to make a complicated set of zoning changes simple to understand, hopefully. The way that the presentation is organized is it's similar to the staff report where there are several proposed changes under general categories. We have 5 general categories, which include increasing flexibility for a range of housing types, modifying design standards, providing additional flexibility to enhance the supply of housing, creating regulatory incentives for affordable housing, and then also just addressing fair housing. When we're looking at these, each of these is going to start with a summary of the proposed amendments, and then we'll get into the analysis on an amendment-by-amendment basis throughout the presentation. So it's similar to the staff report, like I said. Again, really what we're trying to do is enable the construction of housing units that are more affordable than what's currently allowed in a lot of those zones, and making sure that the zoning code is not a barrier to the construction of affordable housing. And we really see it as a complement to other programs that do more directly subsidize those low-income households within the city. So the first set of changes is related to increasing flexibility for a range of housing types, which includes 4 proposed changes. Again, the purpose of this is twofold. 1, increasing the supply of housing, and then 2, increasing the diversity of housing types available with a focus on housing types that tend to be more affordable. And I'll provide examples of each of these as I get into my analysis as well, since it can be hard to understand it when I just describe it. So the diagrams will be helpful later on. I will also note that for the purpose of my presentation, I try to be less technical than I am in my memo because it is a very technical topic, but I want to make sure that folks are able to understand it. So the first change is related to allowing duplexes and up to 2 attached single-family units more widely in lower density residential single-family zones. So currently, we're looking at RS5 and RS8 zones. It currently only allows these uses on corner lots. This proposed amendment would allow it in mid-block locations. The second change would be to allow townhome-style multifamily uses in higher density single-family zones. That is the RS12 zone. And really what we're looking at is currently these zones allow 6 side-by-side attached single-family townhomes, but if they're located on a common lot, that would not be allowed under our current zoning because that's technically multifamily. So this would allow up to 6 attached units on a single lot as a multifamily use within this zone, similarly to as attached single families allowed. The third change is to streamline the process by which second-story residential uses are allowed in certain commercial zones, specifically the community commercial or CC2 zone, and then also to enable the Board of Adjustment to allow ground floor residential uses in commercial zones. So when I say Board of Adjustment review, I'm talking about a special exception. For a special exception to be approved, the board must find that it meets a set of general criteria that tie to impacts to surrounding properties, and then also a set of specific criteria that this proposed amendment proposes for you. The changes that are being proposed in terms of the specific approval criteria would be 1, that it protects historic buildings and that there be a rehab plan if there's an existing historic building, that it not be allowed if it's in a zone that is historic district overlay with at least 3 commercial storefront characteristics, and then also that the proposed dwellings not significantly alter the overall commercial character of that subject zone. So making sure that it fits in a commercial context and not overtake it. The final change is to treat assisted group living uses more similarly to multifamily uses. So these are things like nursing homes or assisted group living facilities. And treating them more similarly to multifamily or residential uses would allow them in more zones. It would simplify review processes in the case of the low-density multifamily zone. And then it would also stop allowing them in the intensive commercial zone, which is more of a semi-industrial zone that we don't typically allow household living uses in. So just treating those more similarly to our residential uses. So with regards to the impacts of the first change, with regards to allowing duplex and 2 attached single-family units in lower density residential zones. I kind of talked about our current regulations, but the 2022 Affordable Housing Action Plan did recommend expanding where these are allowed from just corner lots, specifically in lower density zones. In terms of anticipated impacts, staff believes that the primary impacts for this are going to affect greenfield sites where you have sites on the edge of the community, primarily because those are the areas where it's easiest to plat lots that meet the standards for duplex and attached single-family uses. But it might have some impacts on existing parcels as well, where an existing parcel might be able to accommodate new duplex uses. And I talk primarily about duplex uses in terms of impacts because for attached single family, that would require lots to be re-subdivided, which would come before council for subsequent approvals as well through the final plat process most likely. In terms of the existing parcels that might be affected, staff looked at the maximum number of lots that could potentially accommodate duplex uses, but we do anticipate that most would remain their current uses and that changes over time would happen through gradual conversion and or redevelopment. What we would expect is something similar to what we've seen in the neighborhood stabilization zones, which is the RNS 12 zone. These already allow mid-blocks duplexes, and they are close to the university campus. Since 1992, we've seen approximately 5 single-family homes that have been demoed to build a duplex. That's about 1% of current parcels in that zone. And over that time, we've also seen more units convert from duplex to single family than from single family to duplex. So we'd expect gradual conversion over time. It wouldn't be something where all of a sudden all these are instant duplex uses. But in terms of the number of parcels that could be affected, up to a maximum of about 2,900 lots could accommodate duplex uses, in that they are the approximate lot size that could accommodate them. About 170 of them are in the university impact area, which is that area that's closest to the university campus. And then up to another additional 2,200 lots could potentially accommodate duplex uses with lot sizes that are proposed in a subsequent amendment that I'll talk about later. But approximately 90 of those are located in the university impact area. It's also a challenging situation where historically we have allowed duplex uses in many of these zones, but that amount has decreased, especially after we adopted standards that required duplexes to be on corner lots. So we're really looking at trying to encourage alternative housing types that are more affordable, such as duplexes, compared to detached single-family uses. Now, where those lots are located, again, you'll see the map before you that shows lots that might allow duplex uses that are currently single family. Green lots are those that currently allow duplexes. You can see that they're scattered throughout the city. They're located on corner lots, so especially where you see lots of dense street networks, there tend to be more of those. Yellow areas are areas that would allow duplexes if mid-block duplexes were allowed. Generally, you'll see that these are outside of the city core, but it's a lot of these zones. But a lot of the lots in the city core are actually too small by just allowing mid-block duplexes. The orange areas are those that would allow duplexes if mid-block duplexes were allowed and the duplex lot sizes were reduced as proposed in a subsequent amendment. You'll see a lot of those are located in older portions of the city, so you'll see some in the north side, the Morningside, Twain, Longfellow, and Oakwoods areas. And then the gray areas are where they're not allowed because they're too small or because it's a zone that doesn't allow them. So again, whether a duplex use is established is guided by a number of factors. We're in a challenging market environment for that with high interest rates and high construction costs. There are also other factors that aren't considered in this map, which includes things like the current use, property values, covenants, owner desires for their lots, those sorts of things. So there's a number of factors that go into whether or not a lot might become a duplex use. The second proposed amendment is allowing townhome-style multifamily uses in higher density single-family zones. So as I noted, up to 6 attached single-family uses are allowed in these zones, but they must be on independent lots. This would allow it on a common lot, which has the same look from the street and can be more affordable as well since they can share things like water service, so it can reduce the cost for that housing type. In terms of anticipated impacts, we don't expect it to have a large impact on the number of units that's produced because it is similar to a use that's already allowed within this zone. However, it does add flexibility for housing types that are allowed and also in the arrangement of lots within that zoning district. And so as an example of an attached single-family home versus a multifamily townhome, from the street, they look almost identical. If I didn't have these labels on the images below, the one on the left is attached single-family. The one on the right is townhome-style multifamily. The one on the left is currently allowed. The one on the right is not. So this would allow both of these building types. The next change would be to streamline residential uses in commercial zones. So again, second-story residential in the CC2 zone currently requires a special exception, so that's an additional process, time, and resources that's required for that use. And multifamily uses are currently not allowed on the ground floor in almost all commercial zones, other than in some very specific circumstances in central business zones. So the proposed amendment would change that a little bit. It would simplify the process to allow mixed-use buildings with residential above and commercial below in important commercial centers, since a lot of those are zoned CC2. As an example of that, we call that a vertically mixed-use building. So the building on the right has an example of commercial on the bottom floor, residential above. That's one thing that would be simplified. The second would be to allow the Board of Adjustment to approve multifamily buildings in most commercial zones by special exception. Again, it must meet those specific and general approval criteria, which would help maintain the commercial character of these zones and also protect historic buildings within these zones. The reason that we're proposing this is because it facilitates horizontally mixed-use development. So that is a case where you have a single lot where you might have a commercial building on one side of that lot and a residential building on the other side. That's something that's currently not allowed under our zoning code. You would need different lots, you would need different zoning districts for those, or you would need an OPD for it. So this would allow, you could imagine a situation where you have a large lot, big box commercial store that has a large parking lot, and without re-subdividing, it could potentially be approved for multifamily uses in underutilized parking areas. So that's kind of the horizontally mixed use aspect of it. In terms of areas that are affected by that, areas in blue are those that allow multifamily uses by right currently, so they're multifamily zones primarily. Areas in green are those that allow second-story multifamily uses as long as certain standards are met. The proposed amendment would allow first-story commercial uses by special exception. The areas in yellow currently require Board of Adjustment approval or a special exception to allow second-story residential uses. With the proposed amendment, that would be allowed as long as certain standards are met, so it'd be administrative approval. And then finally, the areas in orange are tied to the previous amendment that I discussed. So those are areas that would allow townhome-style multifamily in addition to single-family townhomes. And those are the RS12 zones. The final change within this category would be to treat assisted group living uses more similarly to multifamily uses. So they are currently not treated as household living uses, and so they are allowed in fewer residential zoning districts. It is generally a best practice to treat assisted living facilities like similarly sized household living uses. So that's really what led to this proposed amendment. What it would do is simplify the process to allow assisted living in lower density multifamily zones and allow assisted living in zones that currently allow multifamily, which is primarily commercial zones. Again, it would also no longer allow it in the intensive commercial or semi-industrial zone. In terms of areas affected, the green areas are those that allow assisted group living uses if certain standards are met. Yellow areas allow them with Board of Adjustment approval. With the proposed amendment, they'd be allowed administratively if certain standards are met. And then the orange areas are those that do not allow them currently, but would allow them under the proposed amendment. And the red areas currently allow these, but would no longer allow them. Those are the CI1 zones. The second set of changes is looking at design standards. And there are 3 changes proposed as part of this. The first would be to eliminate 2 multifamily site development standards to help provide flexibility and also reduce cost for construction. Those 2 standards are specifically that currently most multifamily group living uses not built of masonry or stucco must have a 2-foot base of masonry, stucco, or dressed concrete. This would eliminate that requirement. And then in addition, it would eliminate the requirement that facade materials where there's a change in the wall material around a corner, it has to be wrapped 3 feet around the corner. This would eliminate that requirement. The second proposed change would be to adjust standards to allow duplexes in up to 2 attached single-family uses in mid-block locations. Currently, the way that our design standards are structured, it requires that garages and entrances for duplexes be located on different streets. If we're allowing mid-block duplexes, obviously that would need to be changed. But it does have a great point of trying to limit the impacts of garages, so we do propose a couple additional standards as well to help reduce the impact of garages on a streetscape in these low-density residential zones. So it would limit garages to 60% of the facade, and it would limit it to 20 feet per street. That is, you could have 2 single-wide garages or 1 double-wide garage per street. If you're on, I'll show you some examples as we get into it too. I've got some images for you. But it would also allow more if it was set back 15 feet to prevent it from dominating the street. So that's similar to form-based zones. In addition, we will require that they utilize rear alleys if they are existing. The third change is to simplify a waiver for townhome-style multifamily, specifically as it relates to a parking setback required in the zone. That's a very specific change, and I'll discuss that in more detail when I have a diagram up because it's hard to discuss without that diagram. So first, eliminated the 2 multifamily site development standards. This was something that was brought up in the 2016 Affordable Housing Action Plan that recommended amending these standards. In terms of anticipated impacts, we really are looking at trying to retain standards that more directly address visual interest. So most standards would still be in effect, including things like building entrances and scale, balconies and exterior stairways, other building material standards, mechanical equipment standards, and architectural style standards in the central planning district. It would just eliminate those 2 standards that I discussed previously, that 2-foot masonry base and the 3-foot wraparound corners. The goal is really to reduce the cost of construction and increase flexibility without really impacting that visual interest. So as an example of a building that wouldn't be allowed currently, this image on the left wouldn't be allowed, doesn't have a durable base. So it would allow buildings like this to exist when they currently couldn't exist under our zoning code. The second change would be to adjust the design standards for duplexes and attached single-family and low-density residential zones. So again, currently the entrances and garages have to face different streets, but this really facilitates that proposed Amendment A. So I already discussed how this helps avoid garages that dominate streetscapes. All other design standards would continue to apply, and we would really expect the outcomes to be similar to what you see with an OPD. So many of these sample images that I have on here are from our existing building code, or zoning code, excuse me, as ways that would prevent it from dominating a streetscape. And I've got a laser pointer that I wanted to make sure I got up. So in terms of what that might look like in practice, this upper left is the only one that's currently allowed where you have garages facing different streets. That would still be allowed under the proposed zoning code, but they would be restricted to 20 feet unless they're set back more than 15 feet. To the upper right, you'll see an example of a stacked duplex where they can share a double-wide garage, but they would be restricted to 20 feet if it wasn't set back 15 feet from the street. The lower left, it would be required to utilize an alley if an alley was present, and we would not restrict the amount of garage space that would be facing an alley. It's only those facing streets, so it could be more than 20 feet. And this image on the lower right, in this case, the garages are set back 15 feet, so you could have 2 double-wide garages where they wouldn't dominate the streetscape, but it would still be restricted by that 60% of the facade could only be garages. So a number of different standards. It still allows a lot of flexibility, but it would allow those mid-block locations. The next change is regarding the parking setback for townhome-style multifamily. This is really paired with standards that are trying to regulate townhome-style multifamily more similarly to attached single-family uses, since they look almost identical. And currently, parking for townhome-style multifamily has to be set back 15 feet of building depth from the street. So for the most part, that's not a problem. And I can show you with this diagram. So this black here is the building. You have the front facing a front street to the north. To the south, you have a rear-loaded garages with driveways, and then you have an alley. The 15-foot setback you can see is this orange line here from the front. The goal is to make sure that you don't have parking in front of the building. But in a case like this, where you have 6 attached single-family units, It also creates a building depth line on the west side. So it wouldn't allow parking within that 15 feet of building depth, which is something that wouldn't be required for attached single family. What we're proposing is that can be waived currently by a minor modification, requires additional process, additional time. What we're proposing is that be allowed to be waived just with an administrative approval for specifically townhome style multifamily on side streets. So again, it's a very specific example of ways that we're trying to regulate uses more similarly. But what it does is simplify the process. So it does maintain the intent of the current regulation, which is not allowing that reduction on the front street. The next set of changes is tied to providing additional flexibility to enhance the supply of housing. This started with 3 proposed amendments, one of which is amendments related to accessory dwelling units. The Planning and Zoning Commission has recommended deferral to facilitate neighborhood consultation regarding that specific item. So that's going to be removed from what will be brought before you when this is considered. But the other 2 changes are reductions in lot sizes and widths for detached and attached single family and duplex uses in some zones. The specific zones that would be impacted would be RS5 zones for both single family detached and duplex uses. In the RS8 zone, it would reduce it for duplex uses and attached single family uses. In the RNS 12 zone, it would only affect single family detached uses with rear access. And then in the RM12 and RM20 zone, it's only tied to lot width. So it's just bringing those standards more into line with other single family standards. The other is tied to increase in the bedroom limit for missing middle housing outside of the university impact area. So currently there are bedroom caps on multifamily and duplex and single family attached units. This is proposing for units outside of the university impact area that the number of bedrooms in that bedroom cap be increased by 1. So for multifamily, it would increase from 3 to 4. For duplex and single family attached, it would be increased from 4 to 5. The goal is really to accommodate a wider variety of housing types and family types within those, because currently single family detached is the primary housing type that's allowed for those large families. So with regards to lot size reductions, this really came about because a lot of our pre-1962 lots are currently non-conforming. It is also a best practice to reduce minimum lot sizes that can perpetuate patterns of economic and demographic segregation, and it's best practice to have as much of the lots within your city comply with the zoning code. So in terms of the anticipated impacts of reducing lot sizes, it would bring many non-conforming lots to compliance, approximately 1,600 lots to be specific that are detached single family in the RS5 and RNS 12 zone. It's about 85% of non-conforming lots within those zones. It would still leave about 300 lots that remain non-conforming, but it also provides more flexibility to the arrangement of lots in new subdivisions and also allows the incorporation of smaller lots, which can also reduce the land costs of those units. So as an example of that, assuming that land is $5 a square foot and it's likely higher than that, that could reduce the price of land for a new single-family home zoned RS5 by approximately $10,000. And in terms of conforming lots, the image on the screen is an example of some units in the Morningside neighborhood that are zoned RS5. They're currently non-conforming. They have a 50-foot lot width. They're 7,000 square foot lots. In an RS5 zone, that would not be allowed currently if you were building a new RS5 zone. So it would be allowing those small lot buildings within RS5 zones. And in addition, it would allow duplexes on smaller lots. I did discuss that previously under 1A, so I'm not going to repeat myself there. But in terms of those single-family detached lots that become non-conforming or that become conforming, the green areas are those that are conforming. So you would expect that's most of the city, but you do see in some older areas such as Morningside, Twain, Plum Grove, Manville Heights, the South District, you see a number of non-conforming lots in yellow. Those are lots that would become conforming under the proposed change. You'll also notice a few red lots that are scattered through the oldest areas of town, including Town Crest and the north side. Those would remain non-conforming, but it is a pretty substantial reduction in the number of non-conforming lots. And the other change regarding bedroom limits, again, there currently are caps for duplexes, attached single-family and multifamily uses, which does limit where large households can live. Specifically, forces them to live in single-family housing, or it forces them to cram together, since single-family housing is the only housing type that does not have a bedroom limit. So the 2022 Affordable Housing Action Plan did recommend that we look at these standards, specifically outside of the university impact area, which is within that area bounded in red. So again, that area closest to the university, it would be outside of that, and it would increase the number of bedrooms allowed by one for multifamily, duplex, and attached single-family uses. But it would retain that bedroom cap for the university impact area, which is largely where the reason that the bedroom cap was originated within that area. The next set of standards are tied to regulatory incentives for affordable housing. And the rest of the standards that I've spoken about so far are specifically related to choice, supply, and flexibility, in addition to the cost of housing. This one is specifically related to creating regulated affordable housing. That means that they would be income restricted and rent and sales price restricted as well. And they would need to meet income and rent levels that are guided by current practice within the city for affordable housing units. The two changes that we would, or the regulatory incentives that we would propose would be creating a density bonus for affordable housing units in conventional zoning districts. So what we're proposing is a 20% density bonus where 20% of units are affordable for 20 years. It would also have some additional regulatory flexibility, specifically related to setbacks and height if that was needed to make an affordable housing project work. Otherwise, that wouldn't be allowed. The other change would be to eliminate minimum parking requirements for affordable housing units. And those affordable housing units would have to be affordable for 20 years at least. So both of these provide indirect subsidies for affordable housing units. The minimum parking requirement would not affect any market rate units that are included in an affordable housing development. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, an example of an affordable housing project or a regular housing project in an RS5 zone, the low-density single-family residential zone. Let's say you have a 20-acre zone. It would allow 5 dwelling units per acre, so that would allow approximately 70 homes with room for streets, with rooms for stormwater management. All of those would be market rate. If the 20% density bonus was applied, it would allow approximately 84 homes within that, of which 17 would need to be affordable. And really what it does is provide that voluntary incentive to provide affordable units that are regulated by the city. As a multifamily example, let's say there's a 33,000 square foot lot that would currently allow 12 units in an RM12 zone, all of which would be market rate. If they took advantage of a density bonus, it would allow an additional 3 units that must be affordable. So it would be 15 units on that 33,000 square foot lot. In terms of the way that this would operate, is it would operate similar to what is currently included in our form-based zones. So it'd be administered during our typical reviews with the goal of having these additional units help offset the cost of affordable housing. And this is one of the more common affordable housing incentives that you see in other communities. For the minimum parking requirements, we do currently have this standard in riverfront crossings and form-based zones. So this would just expand it to conventional zones as well. And we have had past plans that have suggested waiving parking requirements as well for all affordable housing units. As an example, let's go back to that 20-acre RS5 development where there are 70 homes that would require a minimum of 140 parking spaces. With the affordable housing incentive, with 84 homes, that would require 134 parking spaces. For the multifamily development, the 12 units would require 24 parking spaces under our conventional development regulations. With the affordable housing incentive, it would allow 15 units with 24 spaces. So again, the only units that don't have a minimum parking standard are those affordable units. And that also helps indirectly offset the cost of providing that affordable housing. And we also see this one is also supporting many of the city's efforts that are trying to encourage alternative modes of transportation, including things like our 2-year free fare, just trying to get people out of cars and into alternative vehicles. The final set of standards are related to addressing fair housing issues. And we have 2 proposed amendments for this. One is creating a process to request reasonable accommodations. The second is to reclassify community service long-term housing as a residential use. So with regards to that first one, the city is obligated under federal law to provide accommodations for persons with disabilities. But we currently don't have a clear process for doing that. And it is best practice to provide that as an administrative relief. So really what we would propose is creating a new process by which they may apply. It'd be a simple, comprehensive process to evaluate all reasonable accommodations requests, and it would use the same approval criteria. They would also reduce the need to call attention to the disability of a person making a request. So in some cases, under our current code, for example, wheelchair ramp, if you want to put that on the front of your house and you can't meet setback requirements, it may require minor modification, which requires notifying adjacent property owners, essentially of your disability. So this would provide a more discrete process, confidential process that would apply in all cases. The second change is reclassifying community service long-term housing use, which currently includes housing with supportive services for persons with disabilities, and it has to be owned by a nonprofit or public agency. Generally, it's best practice to regulate housing for persons with disabilities like similarly sized household living uses. In terms of the anticipated impacts, it would generally simplify the process by which these uses would be allowed, but it would also eliminate the way in which these are treated differently, such as increased density and decreased parking, which is currently allowed for these uses. But it does require less administrative burden. The proposed amendment also allows accessory supportive services that serve residents of a building within residential zones more generally. So it would be like any other amenity provided to residents of a housing complex, whether you have a pool, whether you have a gym. But the minute it starts serving outside folks, then it would be treated as a commercial use. But it is specifying that supportive services are an accessory use to residential uses. In this case, it would create two properties that would become non-conforming. Those are both owned by Shelter House, and they would become legal non-conforming uses. So they would be able to continue as they are, but they wouldn't be able to expand. We have discussed this with Shelter House leadership, and they're not as concerned about that as long as they can continue as they are. And it would allow these uses more widely in more context, so allow them in a more neighborhood context as well. So in this case, I've said that trying to reduce nonconformities is an important goal of the zoning code. In this case, we do believe that addressing this fair housing issue outweighs that need. In terms of amendments removed, I did just want to touch briefly on accessory dwelling units and what we've proposed. That'll come before you in the future, like I noted. Generally, we view ADUs as a great way to increase housing supply without substantially impacting the appearance of a neighborhood. And all of the changes that we're recommending are based on the Johnson County's Livable Communities Housing Action Committee, which is part of their task force on addressing affordable, accessible housing. And it's also based largely on the AARP model ordinance that they provide, because they see that as a great way to allow people to age in their house. So the proposed changes include things like allowing ADUs in any zone that allows household living uses on any lot with up to 2 dwellings, removing the requirement that 1 unit be owner occupied, removing limits on the number of bedrooms in residence, increasing the allowable size of the units, removing the requirement for an additional parking space, and simplifying design requirements. So really what we're trying to do is remove those barriers that we've seen, and that was also proposed as part of the 2022 Affordable Housing Action Plan, especially as a large portion of the households in Iowa City are single-person households, and we expect that number to continue increasing. It will affect a number of parcels. There are 13,000 that are currently eligible for these uses. We've seen 52 ADUs in the last 30 years or so, of which about a third were in the Peninsula neighborhood. Those would continue to be eligible for ADUs under the proposed amendments, but it would allow up to an additional 1,400 new units potentially by expanding the zones and uses to which they're allowed to be accessory. And then similarly to duplex, it would expand the number of units allowed by about 3,100 by removing the owner occupancy requirement. Now, many of those are in the university impact areas, so that's something to keep in mind. But we do expect it to be like duplexes, where it would be a gradual development of these uses. We also see this as supporting the city's sustainability goals by increasing the supply of housing, especially in those existing neighborhoods that have good access to amenities.
I do see Councilor Dunn hand raised with
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. So just a quick clarification on the existing situation part of this slide. I'm looking at your stat for 36% of households in Iowa City are single person. Can you talk to me more about how household is defined in this context?
Yeah, household is defined as any person living within a dwelling unit. So a dwelling unit is an independent group of rooms intended for a household. I mean, they're kind of alternate changes. So if you have a duplex unit, that could accommodate 2 households. If you had an extended family and they all lived within one dwelling unit, that would be a single household. Could be a family household where you have with kids. If you have a brother living with you, that's a household. If you have roommates living with you, that's a household.
So the roommates are, so like if you have roommates, they're all considered a household, whether or not they're sharing all the space or a specific space. It's the total unit, the collective, right?
For the purpose of that figure, that's derived from census standards. The zoning code standards might be a little different.
Okay, thank you.
But you'll see this in the future once P&Z discusses it on October 4th is what we're anticipating. It does affect a number of units. The green areas are those that currently allow ADUs if they're owner-occupied. Under the proposed amendment, it would allow them if they're renter-occupied. The yellow areas are new zones that would allow ADUs, or they're duplexes that would allow ADUs where they were not currently allowed or were not previously allowed. So in terms of the way that we came up with many of these recommendations, we really based a lot of this on national best practices, which looked at other jurisdictions to identify what was working and what wasn't. And we really focused especially on the American Planning Association's Equity and Zoning Policy Guide. That includes a number of best practices like allowing a broader range of building forms, lot sizes and lot widths, reducing minimum lot sizes, allowing ADUs without a public hearing, treated assisted group living, and also supportive services for persons with disabilities like residential uses, then also allowing administrative approval of reasonable accommodations. But we also looked at things like the National Association of Counties, which provides specialized recommendations based on the characteristics of your county. So for Johnson County, we are a high-growth, high-cost county for which they recommend making it easier to build small, moderately priced houses, making the development process simpler and shorter, and expanding vouchers or income supports for low-income renters. That includes things like affordable housing support. And then also for the AARP, as it relates to accessory dwelling units, really they do identify things that have a very chilling effect on the development of accessory dwelling units, including things like owner occupancy requirements, parking requirements, and then some other things that don't apply to Iowa City's zoning code. And we also made sure that they were consistent with the comprehensive plan. So really a lot of these changes that we're bringing before you are changes that can be made with the current comprehensive plan that the city has. So within the vision statement, one of our vision goals is creating an attractive and affordable housing for all people, housing that is the foundation of healthy, safe, and diverse neighborhoods throughout our city. In addition to a number of relevant strategies and goals, such as ensuring a mix of housing types, encouraging developments on smaller lots, et cetera, supporting infill development and small lot development. And we also made sure that we were consistent with the future land use map, which is included within the comprehensive plan. So the future land use map shows what different land uses might be appropriate in different areas. The lowest density zone outside of the rural residential areas allow dwelling units allow a density of up to 8 dwelling units per acre. So we took that into account as we were developing our proposals. And it also notes that this should account for a variety of housing types. We also tied this to the many planning processes that have happened over the past several years that Ann talked about at the beginning of this. We've also gotten a lot of public outreach as part of this, so including a number of pieces of correspondence and individuals who testified at the commission in support and against the proposed amendments. All of the written correspondence in the final commission meeting minutes will be included in your council packet. And the Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval of the proposed amendments, with the exception of those related to accessory dwelling units as discussed by Ann previously. In terms of next steps, we would anticipate setting a public hearing on September 5th, with the goal of a public hearing being held on September 19th. That would also be the first consideration. So the second and third considerations would be held in October under our proposed timeline. So with that, I know that it's a lot of information. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. But that concludes my presentation, so thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a lot of great information that you presented. Council is our opportunity to ask questions, seek any clarification. I would remind us that we are We want to hold any positions on this matter until we have closed the public hearing.
Is it okay if I give a quick comment?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Mayor. I first of all just want to thank you for an excellent presentation. This made a very technical proposal make a lot more sense in my mind, and I hope that more people in the community will take the time to both listen to this recording and/or listen to the recording from the Planning and Zoning Commission. My only comment is that I would love to follow up with you for a further discussion about the ADU proposal. Otherwise, just very appreciative of your time and the rest of staff's time in getting this put before us. Thank you.
I have a couple very technical questions, maybe, but thank you, Kirk. Yeah, excellent job, Anne and Kirk and all of your staff for pulling this together for us. Okay, so and I tried to make notes in order of the presentation. Probably should have just interrupted you. So on the what is proposed to be allowed for multifamily that is currently only single family attached, right? Could you have one building that is then still in a horizontal condominium regime? So it could be owned separately, but oriented vertically. So you could still have separated ownership, but on a common lot, so that for development purposes, it could be, I think, easier to develop that multi-unit building.
Yeah, that's typically what we see for attached
Okay.
townhome style multifamily. The thing that wouldn't be allowed is you couldn't stack townhomes. So the way that we wrote the code is you couldn't have, a townhome with a unit on top and then a townhome with a unit on top. That would
Okay.
not be allowed.
Got it. So
You've
for
got to
this-
be side by side, but it could be a condominium regime.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then for you answered that question about the smaller lot sizes and what that would mean for like the RS5 then becomes 6 units, right? If it was 5 units per acre and you have the 20% affordability incentive, 20% density bonus as an affordability incentive, that's what that translates to, right? I mean, you gave examples with multiple lots, but just in my brain trying to think one acre. Okay. How did you arrive at the 20%, again, still for the density bonus and the affordable housing incentive? How did you arrive at the 20% density bonus and the 20 years duration?
Sure. So the 20 years is based partially on current practice for a lot of our programs at the city. A lot of them use that 20-year mark. And that's also if you're doing a vehicle that's recorded with the deed, they expire after 21 years unless they're removed or renewed. So that also factors into it. In terms of the 20%, it's more art than science, I suppose I would say. It seems consistent with what some other communities have done. Some do higher. A lot of them actually do mandatory affordable housing, which is something we can't do under Iowa law. But it's on the higher end of what is standard in other similar situations. It also seems like it's low enough where it would maintain compatibility with adjacent uses as well. So, like I said, more science or more art than science.
That makes sense. In the example of the long-term supported housing, you gave the example of those 2 shelter house projects. The proposed change would expand where they can be built, but it said except CI1.
Yes.
Okay, so what did you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is it's similar to assisted group living, where currently this use is allowed in the CI1 zone. We typically don't see that as a zone that's appropriate for household living uses, and
Sure.
so it seems like we should treat housing for persons with disabilities similarly.
Okay, great. So that would become a not allowed use in that zone.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Those were all my questions, actually.
Also wanted to say thank you to everyone. This is, as I was talking to somebody before the meeting, this is actually one of the reasons I was excited to run for council, is to take a look at some of these long-term zoning issues that have created inequalities over the decades. So it's really cool to be able to be digging really into this now. And so thank you for all that hard work, and thank you to the Planning and Zoning Commission for doing the first pass through this and collecting some of that input. I think I had a similar question. You may have kind of answered it that Councilor Burgess had about the 20 years. Is that something that you had mentioned? I didn't catch the last part of your answers. The first part was because we've kind of done it that way in the past, but was there something in the second part of your answer that would prohibit us from taking a closer look at that when it comes back before the council?
You could look at that. With something that's recorded with the deed, it expires after 21 years and it has to be renewed. So it is generally simpler process to do a 20-year requirement with something like that.
Can that be worked around?
It could be.
Thank you.
Only because you ended on the 20-year affordability period. I guess it's a bigger question. So what happens at the end of 20 years, as we've been doing in the Riverfront Crossing area for affordable units? What is our plan if for those units that will go regular market rent? What is our plan at that point? Because they're going to be gone. I mean, that's the real fear, that these will be gone. So what is the plan for perpetuity, I guess, in a way?
Sure. So I can't give you an exact answer to that. What I can tell you is that, focusing on maintaining affordability is an important part of the affordable housing puzzle. I believe that, I think it was Planning and Zoning that asked me about in perpetuity affordable housing. My understanding is that that is something that really puts a chilling effect on using these. So these incentives are just that, voluntary incentives. You want to make sure that the cost to the developer is something that provides enough return on investment that they will utilize the incentives. As far as making sure that those voluntary units remain affordable, that would be something that we'd have to look at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And Ann can weigh in
Sorry,
as well.
I just wanted to add something to that. Kirk is right. We want incentives that anyone would use voluntarily, even for-profit developers. But we anticipate that more commonly, these incentives will be used by nonprofit housing developers that are already building affordable housing, and it would be helpful to their projects financially, and they would get a bonus. And those are projects that as nonprofit housing developers would be maintained as affordable units in perpetuity.
Do we have, this is for either one of you, but just going along with this thread, do we have any buildings where they're aging out of that agreement? Like, to the mayor's point about 20 years and then what happens, do we have any current examples or near historical examples of what has happened when 20 years is aged?
Yeah, I don't have any current examples. I know that community development staff maintains a list of that and tracks where units are in their affordability cycle. I know that often those units apply for additional affordable housing funds. Mm-hmm. That is something that happens frequently.
Yeah, it would just.
So it really depends on the circumstances, and I don't have any current examples of that.
I mean, it would be interesting to me to think of tracking those who have been perhaps in place for, who are long-term renters for the affordable housing, and what that shift over to it becoming market rate might mean for them. But then also, you'll have to come back to me. I lost it. So at any rate, I just think it would be an interesting, well, not just interesting, actually vitally important for these community members for us to kind of have an awareness of where they might go. And as you say, there might be applications for, funding to continue to maintain their affordability, but that's all contingent on whether, that landlord or that property owner wants to go that distance, right? So yeah, anyway, I'm just kind of musing out loud.
Is there any way along the line of if someone is currently renting and that, it's the 20th year where it's going to lapse, is there any way to figure out how that household could remain there for an additional period of time with those affordable rates?
Well, I imagine that would be done through a legal means. I'm not sure how that would happen.
Well, I'm referring to if we can alter
allow
how
them to
we're.
stay there if they have been there.
Yeah, I mean, because Councilor Sean just asked if we can, change that 20-year language a little bit. And so I was just wondering if there was a way to consider at the 20th year when someone is actually living there, where they can remain there with those affordable rates until they move at some point in time. But you don't have to answer that now, just something I'm thinking about out loud. The other question I have is related to, with the shelter house example that you gave. Can you speak to why you all suggest or want it to be with nonprofit or governmental ownership? And the reason, as far as you said it was going to be for nonprofit.
No. So our current zoning code regulates housing for persons with disabilities owned by a public or private nonprofit with supportive services as a long-term housing community service use, or community service long-term housing use. So that was adopted, I think, in 2016, maybe.
Okay.
I'm not sure why that specific definition was reached.
So then,
Yeah, and what we would be doing is eliminating that use category
okay.
as a distinct use category.
Okay. And so, and whatever you're replacing it with, because there's a lot of information, trying to track it all. But is there anything that will have that requirement that it's a not-for-profit or governmental?
No, so it would be considered like any other residential use based on the building it's in.
Got it.
So if it's like the two shelter house examples would be considered multifamily. You could also imagine a situation where you have, couple single-family homes built in a small neighborhood that it provides a similar set of services to residents within that neighborhood.
Okay.
And that would be a similar situation, but those would be considered single-family. So it really depends on the zoning code designation that's residential household living.
So the change would allow for private, for-profit housing developers to actually.
Yeah, and they could do it currently, but the supportive services they couldn't provide supportive services, essentially. They could provide housing, just not those services in the same way, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a special category that was created as part of a FUSE project, the Shelter House Housing First project. And that was really what the use was created for. And this would just be saying supportive services can actually be accessory to any residential use, and this is just a residential use. It's not a special category of use.
Okay. And only because I want to make sure that I understand this correctly. So the language of someone who's providing supportive services, they can provide this no matter if they're for-profit, not-for-profit, moving forward.
Yes.
Thank you.
Kurt, do we have any idea in areas where we redevelop how many existing housing units have been lost through that redevelopment process?
Are you referring to riverfront crossings specifically?
Well, that would certainly
or?
be a large area where this would take place, where we see apartment buildings, whatever existing buildings exist on the parcel are demolished. Do we keep a record of how many housing units have been lost through redevelopment?
I don't believe so.
I mean, the reason I ask is I would think typically those houses or those units are affordable. At least that's often the case. We see redevelopment in areas where, land values are relatively lower, and so the housing may be more affordable. I mean, it's been a subject that's been coming up on some of our projects where there's this sense that we're building new, we're building more supply, and at the same time losing affordable housing as a result of the process.
Just to
If I may, I'll offer this commentary. One of the reasons we feel we are legally justified in requiring affordable housing or a fee in lieu in the riverfront crossing areas is exactly for the point you raised, that oftentimes we are losing affordable housing units, not because they're mandated to be affordable, but just because they're older housing stock and as a result are cheaper. So I think the premise of your question is right on base.
And I was just going to add to that, from a regulatory standpoint, I think it's really confusing or almost counterintuitive, because when we talk about affordability, I think how we're thinking about it is like, can a person who wants to live there and afford it, right? And in the context of development, it's like there are standards as to what that will be, can be, that doesn't necessarily mean, as people have raised in our meetings before, right? Like affordable based on a percentage of area median income isn't necessarily affordable, right? Like that. And so when we talk about like, how do we keep rents the same, or how could we know if an older home that costs less to live in, is replaced by something newer that costs more to live in? I mean, so much of that is information that we don't even have access to, right? Like, we don't get leases. We have to, collect all of this, or USG helps us collect information about what landlords are actually charging and that kind of thing. So I just think trying to kind of separate that regulatory, what we can control over, that's based on these standards that we can define, but it's very like aggregated and not specific to, a particular family who's in a certain situation, who's in a certain unit, and the individual, agreements between a landowner and a tenant, for example, like, because we're really restricted in how we can affect the latter.
I would also add that with these proposed amendments, we're not anticipating wide-scale redevelopment. We're not looking at creating a new riverfront crossings district that's specifically intended for redevelopment. Really, what we're trying to do is allow additional units within the neighborhood framework that we have, and really try to reduce the costs of construction as they are. So that's what a lot of these amendments are trying to do. And also in new development, to provide flexibility in the way that we can provide more affordable housing types, additional housing diversity, and hopefully increase the supply in the process. So that's what I would say.
One of the things that I was actually struck by, and it's been sort of as the framing for these extensive and thoughtful amendments, is that you're trying to address so many different things, right? It's not simply affordability. It's also about housing stock, which is, and how do we kind of marry these disparate pieces so that there's more of a coherent sense. And so it sounds to me, as you were going through everything, I was kind of bearing that in mind. It's not simply one component, but it's how did all these pieces fit together in some ways to increase livability ultimately. So I wanted to say that I thought you were trying to thread a needle because this is a really difficult process, but and you have to attend to sort of different components of it. How are you dealing with neighborhood, sort of that neighborhood framework, as you say, while creating more housing stock, while also attending the fact that we're such an expensive place to live? How do we make this more conducive for developers and affordable for people to live? So, and to do it all through these very technical means. I just appreciate it. I need to digest much more. But I just wanted to say that one of the things that I was very much struck by was that you were not focused simply on one component, but really looking at here's the big picture and what this could mean for us decades to come, and how we are going to grow in a way that can help the community. So thank you.
And maybe one more really big picture question for you and or Anne. We've been talking about a comprehensive plan review, right? A larger comprehensive plan review and amendment over the next several years. So how would you see these proposed changes kind of fitting into that, impacting that? Like what, because my sense from how you laid this out was that these are not radical. This is like what we can do now with what we have, knowing where we are. Like you said, not any big redevelopment, but just can you kind of like balance those or talk about that bigger picture for us?
Ann, do you want to cover that? I mean, I can give my opinion as well, but I'll let Ann talk first.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I feel like we are limited in what we can do based on the current policy direction, and in terms of, what uses can be allowed where and how we can be flexible in allowing a diversity of housing types based on our current adopted plans. And I think when we do look at those plans more comprehensively, that's something that we're going to have to evaluate as a community to see if we need to go further, if there are more things that we can do to address housing supply, housing diversity. And that's going to have to be a community conversation that's held when we update those plans. So,
Thank you.
But that's definitely going to be part of that process.
Yeah, and not only is this something that we can do now, but this is something that, a lot of these, or some of these changes have been proposed since 2016, and it's really built over time through those previous planning processes that we've had, including the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice, or the Fair Housing Choice Study, our 2022 Affordable Housing Action Plan. There's lots of input as part of the strategic plan as well, the council strategic plan. So we see this as a continuation of those within our existing comprehensive plan framework. There's probably additional things that we can do for affordable housing in the future as we look at the comprehensive plan. But like Ann said, it's something that we'll come together as a community to discuss at that time.
Great. Don't look like there are any more questions. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to move on to item number 2, clarification of agenda items. Hearing none, we're going to go to item number 3, information packet discussion. We'll start with August 3rd.
I think IP2, which was the NDS annual report, actually gives like a really good additional context. Maybe now that we've had that presentation, go back and look at it, because there's some pieces that kind of, I think, fit together really well. Understanding, like, for example, there have been so few duplexes built, in the last several years, and this, we're trying to kind of address the capacity for that to increase and that kind of thing. So just wanted to call that out because it's also very nicely laid out and very well done and very pretty. So that makes it
Digestible.
I was just gonna say it makes it more digestible. So thank you for that.
For future work sessions next, when we meet again, we're going to have our budget discussion. So any priorities that council has, that'll be on our next work session. So wanted to give a heads up. Okay, we're going to move on to August 10th. And then I know we have the bow hunt program update. So I'm not sure who wants to kind of go over IP5 memo.
We're looking at
I
Rachel's
was just going to
chair.
say that First Assistant Sue Dulick is here, and I know she's present because I know Rachel normally takes charge of this topic and is unable to be here. So I know that Sue would be happy to answer any questions you have. I don't think she has a presentation.
Thanks.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
Hello. as Eric said, my name is Sue Dulick, and I can answer, I think, any questions. But to date, the bow hunt has just occurred on private property, and staff is looking to expand that a little bit on some parcels of public property in light of trying to cull more of the deer. And what staff is suggesting is kind of twofold. Is this year to allow it on the Covered Wagon Drive parcel down in the southern part of Iowa City, and in the future, notifying council via a similar memo that we're going to go on this piece of public property this fall or this winter. And if that would be acceptable to council, a resolution will come at one of the next meetings that will authorize sort of limited use of public property, and via then, including this one for this winter, and then in the future via a memo to council updating them or on the proposal or on the proposed use of a particular use of public property. So staff is just looking for some direction if that would be acceptable to council to bring back to you in the next meeting or the meeting following that.
If I may. One of the things that I remember from previous seasons were people actually being quite, the public, writing in with concerns about safety, honestly, like in Hickory Hill Park by Terry Trueblood, additionally with corpses left. It can be rather disturbing for families and whatnot. So I guess what I would be interested in, and I don't know if this is outside scope, but certainly as a correlative, to have a pretty comprehensive, to use Councilor Burgess's plan, sense of what kind of public announcements, like how would this be broadcast that these particular public areas would be done. And I know that that is in place, so I'm not faulting that, but I think that given that there's the suggestion of expanding, and particularly I know where Covered Wagon is, I mean, it's pretty populous, so I'd be very interested in knowing what the kind of precautions would be to alert the public to this happening, and that would be sort of simultaneous to it coming before us, so that we can consider the two things at the same time.
Sure. And just to remind council, there are limits on where one can hunt in terms of how close it can be to a property line and how large the lot has to be to begin with as well. But sure, we'll work on the resolution, including public notification, and how that will be increased when we're on public property.
Yeah, and I think along with the policy limitations that are in place about where adjacent to residences and those kinds of things that it said, I think if we can have a diagram that shows what that would mean in this particular case. So this the image in our packet outlined just the edges of that parcel, which does make it look like we're talking about close to those homes, but we're not. So I think being able to show people, if you were standing in Weatherby Park, here's what that would mean as far as the portion of that lot that could be used.
Sure.
Thank you.
Right, that was my concern, because Weatherby Park is very close to that area, and Covered Wagon, we've just approved developments. It's just really like developing like wildfire, especially since we've improved McAllister Boulevard. So a lot of homes there, and would these homeowners have to approve of having that site so close to their homes, or not? I mean, currently we don't have, like, if a landowner says they can hunt on my yard, they just have to notify their neighbors, but they don't need permission.
They don't need the
necessarily?
permission because the hunt must occur a certain distance from the property line. And so,
because I don't have any problem with that. I do have a problem with the other kinds of parks, like Hickory Hill. You mentioned those kinds of really more public kinds of park areas where children would be or people would be jogging or biking or something. So, but this area doesn't look like it would. It doesn't have a trail running through it or anything like that. So.
Yeah, actually notating the public access to those public parcels would be really helpful too, because I don't think this one really has it.
No.
Which helps, in my opinion.
True. In addition to sort of the safety part of it, I also think it's proactive to be able to say, we want to make sure that that this is where this is at, and
I'm not sure that, I mean, from the list of, it looks like the letters and the complaints that we'd gotten, it didn't seem like there were a lot of folks in that neighborhood, though, that were complaining about the population of the deer. I know there's a lot of them. I'm on the east side a lot in the Longfellow neighborhood, and I saw two today, in fact, just on the sidewalk, trotting along on Sheridan Avenue, a couple of deer. But those homes are so close together, like we were talking about earlier with the developments, that there's not a good place for a hunter to perch on a tree, and there's just no good place in that neighborhood for a bow hunt or even a sharpshooter hunt. So I don't know what we could do about. I mean, it really seems to be increasing in that neighborhood with the creek there and the parks and the trees. But this one seems like a more open space. But it didn't seem like we were getting many complaints from that neighborhood. I guess we'd have to see.
Anybody have an update on the working with the DNR to come back at some point in the future with the sharpshooting?
The city manager has written to I think it was the DNR as opposed to the NRC, asking them for some guidance on what to do, because we are going into year 4 of the bow hunt in our 5-year plan. And he has not received any response, but presumably within the next 6 to 8 months, staff will have to go back and ask the state. But no.
Thank you.
I can attest. I live on the south side, like by the diversity market. And in the winter, we have seen upwards of 12 deer in our yard eating our bird seed. So I agree with you. They're everywhere.
They're getting around. Do you have what you need?
I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, dear.
Any other items from August 10th? We're going to move on to item number 4, University of Iowa Student Government, USG updates. Hello, and welcome back to school.
Thank you.
Matthew, go ahead. Go ahead and introduce yourself if you like. Sorry, my notes are
All right.
all messed up. Go ahead.
Well, hello, counselors. It's really exciting to be back. If I only know I went to like one city council session, so my name is Matthew Monsivice, if you don't remember. So yeah, I spent my summer in my hometown in Ankeny. I worked at Target and Amazon over the summer, and but now I'm excited to be back here. I'm a first-time renter, and I'm excited to be more involved and present with USG. So yeah.
Great. Welcome.
Awesome. Yeah. Get it out of the way. We now have fancy name tags, so now we're official. Matthews is in the office, but I got mine yesterday. So if anyone, including city staff, ever needs to talk to us, don't be afraid. So yeah, basically the fall semester starts next Monday. So campus is really busy. Everyone's moving in. I tried going on a run this morning and had to avoid 30 kids. It's not fun. I said that as if I wasn't one just 2 years ago. But, that's the perks of being, a junior. Tons of On Iowa events are going on. USG has been hosting a couple as well. So we're trying to get all the new students familiarized with campus, the certain resources we have. Some of the great things that we just had, we've had the food pantry and the clothing closet move downstairs in the IMU. And so now that instead of being in the Iowa House Hotel area, they're more in a central spot. So either members of the community or university members can actually come in and get professional clothing or donated food stuff, and I think it's just an amazing idea, and it looks much nicer than what the original places were. We'll be setting up emails here very soon, so expect an email to your Iowa City email to basically have that set up starting. Hopefully we want to have at least one with all of you individually each semester. So we'll plan on one for fall and we'll plan on one for spring as well. Last year was a little bit different because of me coming in so late and everything, but this year we're going to have it kind of get back on track. And I think that's all we have. So thank you guys so much.
Great. Thank you, and welcome back again. All right, we're on to item number 5, council updates on assigned boards, commissions, and committees. Hearing none, we are adjourned, and I will see you back at 6 p.m. for our formal meeting. It is now 6 p.m. on August 15th, 2023, and I'm going to call the City of Iowa City formal agenda meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Alter.
Here.
Burgess.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Harmson.
Here.
Taylor.
Here.
Teague.
Here.
Thomas.
Here.
All right. Well, welcome to everyone in the council chambers and to everyone online. We're going to move on to our first agenda item. Actually, our second through seventh agenda item, which is our consent agenda. Could I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved, Taylor.
Second, Harmson.
Moved by Taylor, seconded by Harmson. Anyone from the public like to discuss any topic that is on our consent agenda? Seeing no one in person or online, and if you're online, just please raise your hand. We will go to council discussion. Roll call, please.
Teague,
Yes?
Thomas,
Yes.
Alter,
Yes.
Burgess,
Yes.
Dunn,
Yes.
Harmson,
Yes.
Taylor.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. On to item number 8, which is community comment. This is an opportunity for people to speak on a topic that is not on our agenda. If you are in person here, please raise your hand if you would like to speak at this time. And seeing no one online as well or in person, we're going to close community comment at this time. We're going to move on to planning and zoning matters. 9A, rezoning, 614, 622, and 630 Orchard Court. Ordinance conditionally rezoning approximately 1.63 acres of land located at 614, 622, and 630 Orchard Court from low-density single-family residential with a planned development overlay to Riverfront Crossings Orchard. And I'm going to open up the public hearing.
Mayor, before Ms. Sitzman proceeds, I believe a couple of the council members may wish to make a statement about their participation in this hearing.
Great. Okay.
Now?
Yes, I'd like to state that I'm aware that the property owner's attorney has asked for my recusal based on discussions I had with the developer following the last rezoning application. And I would like to say that I have not prejudged this rezoning application and can remain fair and impartial in its considerations and thus will not be recusing myself. I do, however, look forward to hearing from the staff, the developer, and the public before making my decision.
Thank you, Councilman Thomas, for your comments. I appreciate what Councilor Thomas has to say because the property owner's attorney has also asked for my recusal in this matter based on discussions I had with the developer following the last rezoning application. Councilor Thomas and I did indeed meet in good faith with the developer to share thoughts about the project. I believe that I can be fair and impartial in consideration of this application. For that reason, I will not be recusing myself from voting on this and will be voting without prejudice. I will seriously consider what I hear from staff, the developer, and the public when making my decision.
Thank you. We're going to get comments from our staff, and if the developer or the applicant wants to come up after, they can certainly come up at that time. So welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Danielle Sitzman, Neighborhood and Development Services. So as the Mayor read, the title of this action is for rezoning of 614, 622, and 630 Orchard Court, shown here in the white outline. The applicant is Ryan Wade of M&W Properties, and they're requesting the rezoning of the remaining 1.63 acres of the Orchard Sub-District for future redevelopment. The property currently contains 3 multifamily buildings constructed in the early 1980s prior to the adoption of the form-based code. This shows the current zoning of the property and the properties surrounding it. The areas in purple are what are our form-based code districts. There's 2 different ones represented in here, although they're both shown in purple. So the Orchard District is the RFCO zoning, which is immediately to the east and south of the subject property. A little bit farther east of that, also in purple, is the RFC West Riverfront. So the WR, if you can see that in the very small yellow labeling, is a different subdistrict. Each subdistrict in the form-based code has slightly different form regulations. Some have slightly different use regulations. They definitely all have different height regulations. So we'll just be talking about the Orchard District tonight. The application represents a smaller portion of an area recently requested for rezoning. The rezoning will complete the land use vision for the adopted downtown and riverfront crossings master plan for the Orchard District, as I mentioned, that O district. No concept for redevelopment is included in this request. The subject property does not contain any sensitive land or features regulated by the city code, such as woodlands, slopes, wetlands, stream corridors, prairie remnants, or archaeological sites. Again, talking a little bit about the past history of the property. In 2016, this area was included in the Downtown and Riverfront Crossings Master Plan. It was an amendment to that plan to add the Orchard District. And on this map, it's shown as that kind of mustard yellow color on the far west side. You can see it just towards the middle as it follows the rail line there. Because it's a form-based code district, it actually needed to have a code language adopted specifying what those form-based code regulations would be. Those were added to the city's zoning ordinance in 2017. At about the same time, one of the properties in the district was rezoned to Orchard District. That's 627 Orchard Court. So shown here, just the east of the subject property is that property that was developed under the new regulations. In 2018, a portion of Orchard Court and Benton Street was also rezoned to Riverfront Crossings Orchard. That's the area to the south. And then in 2022, there was a request to include that portion as well as the subject portion in a rezoning for the southern part and a rezoning just for the northern part as well. That did not pass City Council. It needed a supermajority to pass. So just a little visual history again. The property to the east was rezoned in 2017 here on the left-hand side, shown in outline. The property to the south was rezoned in 2018 and still has a valid Riverfront Orchard rezoning placed upon it. The failed rezoning on the left-hand side here was both the south and northern portions, and tonight's rezoning is simply the northern portion. As with rezonings, most rezonings that are not OPD rezonings, there are two general criteria that are reviewed: consistency with the comprehensive plan and compatibility with the neighborhood. In regards to comprehensive plan consistency, the current vision, district vision for this plan area is the Downtown and Riverfront Crossings Master Plan. If there are previous plans that maybe or studies that may have been done in this area, they were overwritten by that comprehensive plan process, and as it was adopted in 2016 for the subject property. The district was specifically adopted to incentivize redevelopment of this area, encourage redevelopment, to address conditions of the area which were negatively impacting the public realm for walking and biking, as well as other folks living in the area. The conditions at the time included duplexes along Orchard having very auto-oriented frontages with large garages and driveways, older single-family homes having no street frontage or pedestrian access. You can see that probably a little bit on this slide. There's some houses just not along Benton Street, but just the next row in from that, north of Benton Street, that are nestled behind it. The neighborhood frontages, so they have actually no access to streets. And abrupt changes in low-scale development from the single-family neighborhood to the west to very high-intensity West Riverfront form-based code districts that were developing in 2016 along Riverside Drive. So this Orchard District was intended to be a transition between those two and to incorporate forms that were appropriate for a transition. The rezoning would encourage redevelopment, create a transition, and improve design quality based on the elements that were incorporated into the regulating plan and the code language itself for the form-based code. Those transitions are expressed in the form through limits on height. There's a limit of 3 stories in height in this district with no option for bonus height to be added to that. It does restrict the forms of the buildings to more smaller forms such as the I think I'll talk about those a little bit more with the existing compatibility of the existing neighborhood. But it also includes stringent design requirements. So form-based code does require design review and has some very specific elements that are reviewed for elements of buildings that address the street, the fronts of the buildings, their entrances, and the layout of course, parking and things like that. The subject property could not be redeveloped under its current OPD zoning. And in this case, the present application, the rezoning would specifically implement the master plan, so the consistency with the comprehensive plan is baked into its design, and in fact this zone would be the only zone that staff feels is consistent with the comprehensive plan. So moving on to the second criteria, which is compatibility with the existing neighborhood. By design of the regulating plan and the text of the zoning code, any code compliant development that follows through on this riverfront crossing orchard zone would be compatible with the existing development based on, again, as I said, those design elements that are baked into the code. There are fewer uses allowed in this orchard subzone than other riverfront crossing zones. The allowable building forms include cottage homes, row homes, townhomes, live-work townhomes, and low-rise multifamily buildings, all of which are meant to be on the scale closer to single-family forms. There is, as I said, a 3-story height maximum with a 10-foot step back above the second story. And then again, as I said, no bonus height is allowed. There's also an enhanced or a greater setback required when adjacent to RS8 zones, and there's some limitations on the number of bedrooms and the mix of 3-bedroom units that would be allowed. In 2018, there was a traffic study completed to look at the impact of the redevelopment potential of the southern property adjacent to this and how it would impact both the immediate intersection and the intersection slightly to the east of Benton and Riverside Drive. At that time, it was determined with the southern rezoning that it would be an acceptable amount of change, not to necessitate any changes. However, with the addition of this additional land to the rezoning, there is a need for signalization at this time based on that traffic study. So with the full development of the rest of the Orchard District, there would be a need for a traffic signal at the intersection of Orchard Court and Benton Street. So included in the conditions of the rezoning are public improvements that the developer will need to complete at the time of that development. And I'll go through those conditions a little closer to the end. So just a little bit of a background review again and where we're at in the process. As I said, there was a master plan adopted for the vision. There was implementation of that master plan through the Riverfront Crossings Form-Based Code District, specifically the Orchard Subdistrict, and following that, there was this 2 rezonings, and the third one that just recently failed, and then in blue is the rezoning of only the northern portion, as I mentioned. All of the conditions that passed on the southern portion would still be in effect for the southern portion, and the conditions written for this rezoning would only apply for the subject property. After the rezoning is completed, the steps that would be in the development process would include primarily administrative and staff review steps. Those include a site plan and a form-based code design review, as well as building permits. We have received a signed CZA from the applicant tonight, so the approval was based on, or the recommendation was based on a review of the relevant criteria as I've gone through tonight. Staff did recommend approval, and at their meeting on July 19th, the Planning and Zoning Commission concurred with staff's opinion and voted 5-0 to also recommend approval of the rezoning. Now that CZA does include several conditions. They are related to the construction of public improvements, specifically a 5-foot wide sidewalk along Orchard Street or Orchard Court frontage. As I mentioned, the traffic signalization at West Benton and Orchard Street, and reconstruction of Orchard Street as necessary with those improvements. That concludes staff report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question about the traffic study for signalization. What was the tipping point that took the first recommendation from no signal to signaling?
So traffic studies are based on traffic counts, and traffic trips are based on unit counts or estimates of those. So with only the southern portion developing, the number of trips generated was such that the level of service of those intersections was still acceptable. Adding in the additional units and the additional trips those units might generate degraded that level of service down below the threshold to warrant a signal. So it may have been it's always an estimate, so it may have been, even with some development, necessary, but it was clearly necessary with the additional development proposed with this rezoning.
The types of people anticipated to occupy a unit, does that go into effect at all? Because if these are going to be students, there could be a decrease.
The estimates are very generally calculated. They're not as fine-tuned to specific demographics. You might see a difference in trip generation for folks that just don't drive as much, period. But I don't think that a student population necessarily versus a typical apartment would have a distinction built into it. So they're very general estimates, and they tend to be based on worst case.
And then another last question. Because there's a signed CZA, for this condition, there will be, let me see, so there is kind of a, Orchard is kind of tucked away from Benton Street, so the signalization doesn't have to be done at the same time because there's no other improvements right there. Has there ever been a time where, or is it possible to have that condition present but only used after the fact to see if it's actually needed?
I suppose it could be wordsmithed that way, but it's much more difficult to have a developer remobilize resources once they've left a site and already developed. So they tend to be timed with, cost savings for construction and impact on the neighborhood. You don't necessarily want to disrupt everybody's lives again once they've moved in with having to have a pretty major intersection shut down or restricted to make those improvements. There are lane changes and curb changes that have to go with the signal, so it's not just a matter of putting a pole and some lighting in. It is an offsite improvement, which is why it's in this conditional zoning agreement, because it will take a little bit of thought for them to do potentially if the northern and southern portions eventually develop at separate times. But this is our opportunity to tie it to the rezoning at this point, kind of the last chance with the rezoning.
Thank you. Hearing no other questions, thank you. Anyone from the development group would like to speak?
My question is, can I wait to speak until I hear this council's rebuttal?
No, you'll be allowed to speak at this time.
I have nothing to say then. Thank you.
Okay, great. And just for the record, will you state your name and who you're with?
Ryan Wade with M&W Properties.
Thank you. All right, so I'm assuming that there is no comments from the developer. Anyone from the public like to address this topic? If you're present, I ask that you come to the podium. There is a sign-in sheet. Please give your name and the city you're from. Seeing no one in council chambers and seeing no one online, before I close the public hearing, I'll give one more opportunity for anyone to make comment from the public. Seeing no one in person or online.
I just want to make sure you weren't going to close the public hearing until you look for an informal consensus.
Yes. All right. So I wanted to just talk to my counselors now. Counselor Dunn, I can't see you, but just wondering if people are inclined to vote with P&Z. Just wanted to get, all right, so I do see a majority here, and I'm going to close the public hearing. And, all right, could I get a motion to give first consideration?
So moved. Alter.
Second, Burgess.
All right, council discussion.
Well, I'll start off the council discussion. I will be supporting the project. It's with the support, of course, as it's the way we're moving forward, it would be a staff review of any site plan developed for a subsequent project. As of now, we have no project, so there's nothing. This rezoning is not conditional on a site plan. So in terms of looking forward to a future project, I did want to mention some thoughts I've had regarding that process, since the council will not be involved with this approval with that future development. And, there are concerns and comments related to the site plan. Because the site plan, in my view, is kind of critical to the outcome of the project. And there are a number of elements that go into the site plan. I think most of our discussions to this point have focused on the buildings, particularly with respect to this notion of that the project be compatible in massing and scale with the residential neighborhood to the west, and that this project would serve as a transition. And as was noted with the previous application, the zoning code requires that no building exceed three stories in height. So it's a height limitation. And the comprehensive plan is speaking about massing and scale. So there are two different means of evaluating building size with that. So there's a certain lack of clarity, if you will, in terms of how that transition is made. The comprehensive plan is talking about massing and scale. The zoning code is talking about building height. This is a residential zone. It's not mixed use like the other sub-districts within Riverfront Crossings. And subsequent to this rezoning of Riverfront Crossings, with the South District and the Aurora District, issues related to massing and scale were integrated into the zoning code. So there was a greater emphasis on the means by which the comprehensive plan was asking for a transition. So what that suggests to me is where we are, where staff will be, and where the developer will be, is trying to understand through using judgment how that transition can apply to this project. So there's some flexibility there, in other words. Some of the other elements that I think make up a site plan that I would like to emphasize would be the question of open space. And it really wasn't clear in the previous proposal if open space had been included in the site plan. And I just want to emphasize that, in my view, that the open space is a critical element with this project, and it actually is written into the code. There is a 10-foot per square foot requirement for every bedroom that's included in the project. So there is that requirement. I certainly would emphasize the need to not waive that requirement, partly because of the high density that's being proposed. I would also add that if, in using the open space, that can be a way of designing the buildings so that their mass and scale can be modified, if you will, modulated in a fashion to reduce its sense of mass. One example is directly to the east of the Orchard District, the project that's facing Riverside Drive. The building is designed in a U shape. the building wings that enclose an outdoor space. And what that does is it satisfies the open space requirement, but it also breaks up the mass of the building and also increases the natural light that can access the dwelling units and provide views as well. So there's opportunities, in short, with the open space to begin to address the massing and scale question that was raised in the comprehensive plan. And then lastly, the pedestrian circulation and amenities, I think, are really important as well. I think that's covered in the comprehensive plan, in the guidelines. Again, it wasn't clear to me in the previous proposal the extent of the pedestrian circulation, but I think moving forward, I would certainly encourage, again, given the scale and density of this project, that we need we need to have that pedestrian circulation and amenities included in the project. You know, I would just mention, for example, I was looking at the Central District plan, which was developed back in, I think, 2007. Portions of Riverfront Crossings used to be in Riverfront Crossings. Portions of that used to be in the Central District. And in one of the maps in that plan, they indicated an area which was scheduled or defined as redevelopment, high-density multifamily. And one of the reasons that was stated for why that area, and this would be the area south of Burlington Street, the student apartments there, was the lack of open space and pedestrian circulation and amenities. So I think that speaks to the importance of those two features in any site plan, but I think particularly when you're talking about a high-density development, are especially critical. So I'll leave it at that. You know, I look forward to see how the staff work with the developer and coming up with a plan that has an opportunity to be something that does match up as I think we would all like with the comprehensive plan and the zoning code, and create a high-quality living environment for the residents.
I have very similar concerns with Councillor Thomas, particularly about the open and outdoor space and the pedestrian circulation, the walkability. We as a council and the city have been all about walkability and trails in the community, in the area. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind with this development. And the mass of the building, he mentioned that too. Otherwise, I was, I'll just leave it at that.
So I had questions about, you know, the traffic light signaling. I still have concerns, mainly because it is, you know, the first street after a stoplight on Riverside Drive. So it's the first street west. If the signal was going to be even 2 streets west of Riverside, I wouldn't have any concerns. But I do worry that a signal there it may not be in the best interest. So I don't know if there's any thoughts or suggestions from any of my counselors of what could be done. You know, of course, I would propose that we kind of get the commitment. I understand the issues that it could be more cost to the developer. And, you know, once they finish a project, I don't know if there's a way for us to have them figure out what the cost is. We put money somewhere reserved for that, and, you know, and if we go through a period of time and we're looking at the actual counts, to determine if that's needed, then either we, if it is needed, then, the city agree to pay the difference because, new construction costs will be more, or we return and if it's not needed, we return the money. I do have concerns about the signaling. So if people have thoughts, you can certainly share that.
I remember the last time we talked about this, and so imperfectly because it's been a few months, but actually I had similar concerns and asked questions, and I remember that Kent Ralston came up, and I don't remember all the specifics of his answer, but I remember in part, he talked about the studies and that they did believe that that would work, even being so close, because I remember we talked about that. I don't remember the specifics. I remember being satisfied with his answer, though, which led me to the vote the last time around. So it at least contributed to that the last time around. So, nothing has changed for me since then. So I don't know. That's not probably as much detail as you were looking for, but that's as much as I can remember from a few months ago on specifics. So
I do see Councilor Dunn hand raised.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. I guess this is a question for Eric in the context of this conversation we are currently having about signalization. Given what has happened in previous zoning requests, I don't know that we're even in a position to change anything at this point since the public hearing has been closed. So I don't know that technically, if I'm understanding, the past decisions as well as what is in front of us right now, I don't know that we are in any position to change whether or not it's signalized or how that's arranged. Could you confirm or clarify that?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Dunn. You're correct in that the public hearing has been closed, and so we are past the time to change the conditional zoning agreement. I think that's what you're referring to. And on that topic, I would just indicate that at the time, the conditional zoning agreement just requires the construction of the signalization at the time of the building permit being issued. And that's of significance because, of course, at the time the building permit is issued, it will be clear what the density is and what we would expect for traffic counts as a result of that density. And that would be certainly a time when there would be presumably confirmation that it will in fact be required. I too remember some of Mr. Ralston's comments, like Councilor Harmson. Certainly, I assume, Mayor, your concern is that it's a short block between Riverside Drive and Orchard Street or Orchard Court to the north. And I believe his comments were that we would need to certainly time the light so that you didn't have westbound traffic being allowed at Riverside Drive but being stopped at Orchard Court, because that would create quick problems. But again, with today's technology and traffic controls, I think they're able to handle that. But to address your last point, in the event that there would be something with incredibly low density put forth as a development, certainly the staff could review and could waive a requirement if it looked like, for whatever reason, it wasn't going to be necessary. But I got the impression that more or less any increase in density at this location, which would normally be the reason why you would do a redevelopment, would require signalization.
Just a clarification on that particular point. Given the language of the conditional zoning agreement is shall, I don't see, is there something that's not there as to allow city staff to annul that agreement? Because it seems pretty clear to me. It says the public improvements shall include, but not be limited to, and then it increases. It's talking about sidewalks, talks about signalization, and a reconstruction of the street. So in that way, if we are bound to approve what is in front of us right now, I don't see how a lower density project could even result in a lack of signalization. I'm just doing clarity of all the technicality stuff here.
Right. I guess I've never encountered a situation in which density, went backward. And so to be clear, I'm laying out a hypothetical that I think has almost zero chance of coming to fruition. But you are correct, Councilor Dunn. I mean, the language "shall" is being used, and in the event that staff decided that it was no longer necessary, I suspect we would want to come back to council and explain why, and at least give you notification, perhaps seek your approval for being able to waive that. That said, I'm also aware that, for example, the earlier rezoning application for what I'll characterize as the southern portion of this area included things such as a 30-foot wide pedestrian easement walkway and so forth. That'll kind of depend on the site plan layout. It might be that ultimately that's really not the best way to approach this. And that kind of thing is the kind of thing that staff considers with some frequency, and that's why they're the experts and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, I think they do have some ability to be flexible.
Well, I just want to maybe bring my comments to a close. So thanks for all the input and reminding me what Kent said. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable in knowing that our staff, if they were moving forward with this project and saw that, the signalization may not be needed, that they would, bring it back to council's attention. So I'm comfortable with that. Otherwise, I will be supporting this project.
Mayor, I just wanted to add that I appreciate you bringing the comments up, and I appreciate you, Eric, and your comments about the traffic signalization, because it had been a concern of mine, one of my concerns, especially in light of recent traffic fatalities we've seen in the city here. But you talking about that perhaps they could be synchronized, that helped to alleviate that for me, because I know the city and the traffic division can do that. So I think that would be an excellent answer to that situation.
I just wanted to say that this has my support, and in a slightly different perspective in reading the P&Z notes where the presentation was given, as well as the one that Danielle just provided. I feel like at the same the flexibility actually is a real positive here, and that there are parameters. I mean, again, we all can look at read the same things, and come away with a different perspective. But to my way of thinking, I thought there are two ways to understand transition, and that it is both mass and scale and height, that's providing some guidance. Additionally, taking into account what the neighborhood is and the language of transition, that there are some hard stops there about what can go in, what can't, that there are no height bonuses. These are all things that I think are going to make for a good project and will be good for the area. Certainly I think the developer, whoever that ends up being, will have a good sense of sort of how the neighborhood looks and feels, and the fact that there are explicit things to make it more walkable, to make it to do these sort of public improvements that are in the CZA, as well as the things that are in the comp plan and the master plan, I think are really good touchstones for the development. And I just wanted to say that I'm supporting this, and I feel like, on balance, these are things that can help create something that will be useful, notwithstanding that there can be certainly different perspectives on this. But to my way of thinking, I felt that this was kind of helpful without being prescriptive. So I'll be supporting this.
Hearing no other comments. Roll call, please.
Thomas?
Yes.
Alter?
Yes.
Burgess?
Yes.
Dunn?
Yes.
Harmson?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Teague?
Yes. Motion passes 7-0. Can I get a motion to accept correspondence?
So
moved.
moved.
Taylor.
Second. Alter.
All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Item number 10A is 2023 equipment shop roof replacement. Resolution approving project manual and estimate of cost for the construction of the 2023 equipment shop roof replacement project. Establishing amount of bid security to accompany each bid, directing city clerk to post notice to bidders, and fixing time and place for receipt of bids. I'm going to open the public hearing and welcome.
Hi, good evening. So this project is to replace the roof on the equipment shop building. It's located at the southeast corner of Highway 6 Riverside Drive. It's just a simple project to replace the roof that was damaged during the storms last spring. We have funding in the replacement account and also what we'll get from our insurance settlement. So our project are to take bids at the end by the end of the month and then have the roof substantially complete by the end of the year. So, any questions?
You said the insurance is still yet to be determined. Do we have an idea of when they're going to decide?
So we'll pay our deductible for sure, and then we're still sort of negotiating with the amount that they'll cover. But one of the things that we need to do is actually get the bids and have them review the bids that we receive.
And do I remember that the time is a bit of a factor on this because of the use of this facility with the upcoming winter weather?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one in person or online, I will close the public hearing. Can I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved, Taylor.
Second, Harmson.
Council discussion.
Get a roof on before winter.
All right, agreed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Roll call, please.
Alter,
Yes.
Burgess,
Yes.
Dunn,
Yes.
Harmson,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 10B, Sturgis Ferry Park Improvements in Southside Recycling Center. Resolution approving project manual and estimate of costs for the construction of the Sturgis Ferry Park Improvements in Southside Recycling Center project. Establishing amount of bid security to accompany each bid. Directing city clerk to post notice to bidders. And fixing time and place for receipt of bids. I'm going to open the public hearing. And welcome.
Good evening. My name is Brian Dannon. I am a senior engineer with the City of Iowa City. I'm going to talk about our Sturgis Ferry Park improvements and the Southside Recycling Center project. Our project location is at 1700 South Riverside Drive. It's just south of Highway 1 and 6, east of Riverside Drive and west of the Iowa River near the Iowa City Airport. If we go through just a quick project description for everyone on what's going to be included in this project. The existing Sturgis Ferry Park is hard for first-time visitors to navigate and is currently lacking in amenities. This project will enhance the usability of the park. Some of the improvements that we are proposing are a paved and accessible parking lot, which you can see here in the light gray, a pavilion shown here in the dark gray, a drinking water fountain and portable restroom, also shown in dark gray here. We're improving access to the boat ramp by paving the parking lot access and then also providing dedicated parking for vehicles and trailers. Bioswales are included to improve water retention and filtration. We're including provisions for a future trail connection going through our entrance. We also have the recycling site included here, which is on the south side of the location. This will include a cardboard compactor and roll-off recycling containers for paper, glass, plastic, and metal. Construction phasing for the project will include closing the park and the boat ramp for the duration of construction. Coordinations occurred between many different departments and agencies, including here at Iowa City, Parks, Landfill and Waste Management, Streets, Wastewater, Water, ITS, Fire and Safety, and then also coordination has occurred with the FAA, Iowa DNR, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This project fits in with Iowa City's strategic plan, in specific, the neighborhood and housing and mobility sections, creating and inviting an active outdoor space with unique and engaging recreation offerings is part of the neighborhoods and housing. This is being provided by the improved boat ramp access to the river, and also the addition of the pavilion, drinking water, and portable restroom facilities. We're also working to grow and prioritize bike and pedestrian accommodations by including access for the bike and pedestrian trail in the future. They'll also have access to the pavilion, the water, and the restroom facilities. Estimated construction costs for the project are $790,000. Funding sources for this come from the Sturgis Ferry boat drop improvements and Southside Recycling site funds. Schedule for the project is a bid opening on September 12th, award at the September 19th council meeting. Construction start date is October 16th of this year, and it's anticipated to complete construction in spring of 2024. And again, my name is Brian Dannon with the City of Iowa City Engineering Division. My contact information is here as needed. Answer any questions?
Is the expectation on the timeline that there will be work over the winter, or is it just going to start and then there'll be a pause and finished in the spring?
There will likely be a pause over winter time. They will, however, hopefully get started here yet this fall.
Okay.
Thank you, Brian. I had a question. I was at this park recently and very excited about the amenities. And just to orient kind of the scale of this project, it looks like it's overlaying mostly the gravel parking lot area, because I know there's a prairie area to the north that's not being impacted. Is that right?
Yes, I've got kind of here I can show, this is the existing site. The portion where you can see coming in here, this is where the boat ramp is still going to be. This area will be kind of the parking area with our pavilion will sit over here. Nothing over up here further to north will be impacted, and the recycling center site will kind of sit here in this grassy area.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one in person or online, I'm going to close the public hearing. Can I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved, Taylor.
Second, Thomas.
Council discussion.
I'm just really happy to see this project. I used to live in that, very close to that neighborhood, and would drive by it all the time, and it was kind of a joke that it was called a park, but it was used a lot. Boaters there constantly, including the water safety rescue folks utilize that site. So I'm glad to see that you're can continue to have the boat ramp there, but to add the amenities, and I think you called it, and make it more inviting space, because as she'd mentioned, currently it's just a gravel drive into there, and it just that's big open space, but really not much to it. So I'm just happy to see this and look forward to seeing the final project.
Roll call, please.
Burgess.
Yes.
Dunn.
Yes.
Harmson.
Yes.
Taylor.
Yes.
Teague.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Alter.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 10C, wastewater roof improvements. Resolution approving project manual and estimate of cost for the construction of the wastewater roof improvements project. Establishing amount of bid, security to accompany each bid, directing city clerk to post notice to bidders, and fixing time and place of receipt of bids. And I'm going to open the public hearing and welcome again.
More roofs. This time they'll be at the wastewater treatment facility down by the soccer complex. And then we've got one small roof just off McAllister on a stormwater pumping station. So the project it's a mix of complete tear-off and replacements, and then also some patching. So we've got 3 buildings with a complete tear-off, so that'll be the gas metering building, sludge processing building, and then the South Collister pump station, which is not shown on this picture. And then the other buildings just have miscellaneous patching and sealing. Our estimated cost is about $335,000, and there's a CIP account for this project. It's got the same schedule as the other project. Any questions?
Hearing no questions, thank you. Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one in person or online, I'm going to close the public hearing. Can I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved, Burgess.
Second, Taylor.
Dunn.
Moved by Taylor. I'm going to give that to Dunn. We heard you. Seconded by Dunn. Council discussion. Roll call, please.
Dunn,
Yes.
Harmson,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Alter,
Yes.
Burgess.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 10D, code amendment to extend the time a site plan remains valid. Ordinance amending Title 18 entitled Site Plan Review, Chapter 2 entitled Procedures and Submittal Requirements to extend the time a site plan remains valid. This is first consideration. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved, Alter.
Second, Burgess.
And welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, Mayor. Danielle Sisman, Neighborhood and Development Services. This is for a code amendment to Title 18, which is part of the code that my division administers, but is not zoning code, so it does not go through the Planning and Zoning Commission. Currently, the amendment would change the time that it takes for an approved site plan before it expires. Currently, if a building permit is not issued within 1 year of the approval of a site plan, the applicant is required to reapply. The amendment proposed extends that time frame from 1 year to 3 years. After that 3 years, the applicant would then need to go and reapply if they had not already commenced construction or had the building permit issued and commenced construction. The time frame that we're requesting grants additional time for development. We found over the last several years that it's taking longer for developments to get through the stages they need to go through internally once they get a site plan approved to actually commence construction and get their building permit. It's not necessarily that our issuance of building permits is taking longer, but there are many other factors in development that are anything from the design and materials and delays that we've just seen kind of become more of the normal. So this request would extend that period to a 3-year time frame instead. We feel like that's the right amount of time. It's not too much. In a greater than 3-year span, it's possible that the city might adopt new codes that would affect site planning, and we would want those new codes to be applied to new development. So we're fairly certain that 3 years is enough time, but not too much.
Any questions?
Are there currently any places in Iowa City that this would, like how many this would impact, like current site plans that are out?
There's been several that have gotten close. One that has actually just changed ownership over the time, and so it's a little unique. But we found that we've had to remind folks that their 1 year is getting close, and we've had 2 or 3 in the last 2 or 3 years, which is a lot more than we've ever seen have that problem. So,
And waivers were allowed. You could you could extend, I guess, extensions.
I don't believe there's an extension allowed for a site plan, and you either do it within the time frame or it expires. And so then they're reapplying for exactly the same plan, and we're spending staff time to review it, and the fee structure is not such that it really makes much difference. We don't do plan reviews to make money. So it's really just been more of a waste of time for everybody to re-review something that's just simply a little stale but not needing to be changed yet.
Is this comparable, Danielle, to say Coralville and North Liberty? Do you know?
I'm not sure that we've checked every jurisdiction to see how they do it. Every jurisdiction's got a slightly different process for site plan review. Like I said, I don't think it's an extremely long period of time. If anything, 1 year might have been a shorter than average period of time for a site plan.
I have a really ignorant question. You said 1 year and 3 years, and in the resolution, it's 18 months and 42 months.
So there's 2 things that can trigger it to be okay. Either you get your building permit, or you get your building permit and you start your construction. So we're just moving all of those brackets forward to add time to them.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one in person or online. Council discussion?
I think that obviously some of the reasons given make sense. The only thing that gives me a little bit of pause is we're getting ready to do a comprehensive plan, which may involve us changing up some of, could have some impact on what we have, maybe current site plans. So things like 3 years out from now, I'm a little concerned that might be we might be tripping over some stuff that we may change. We may want to change and have the flexibility to be able to change. So if it's, I don't know that we're talking probably a huge number of projects, or maybe a handful that would have that. That's the one thought that I had when I was reading this. It's like, with the comp plan review coming up starting, January or whenever.
If you'd like.
Yeah,
the
sure.
comp plan process will be a multi-year process itself. Simply changing the comp plan wouldn't change any of the site development standards. That would be zoning code changes. So that would be time on top of after comp plan is finished. So anything likely approved during the comp planning process is going to probably be built by the time we get to changing the site development standards to reflect anything that the comp plan may have said the vision should be different for. They're kind of independent components of the development process. I don't know if that allays your concerns, but I think the timeline for the comp plan changes is going to be much longer than any project that's in that pipeline while that's happening.
Sure, kind of. I just want to make sure we weren't chaining ourselves to something that maybe 18 months or 2 years from now, we'd be like, we want to do something different with that part of the city, especially since we're talking about stuff like that already earlier tonight.
So those kinds of visioning changes have to trickle down through zoning. So something that's zoned for that use, even if you change the vision for that area, it's still allowed to be that use. So it wouldn't really, the comp plan wouldn't affect those things anyway.
Okay.
I guess
All right.
asked a different way, Danielle, if we implement significant zoning code changes because of the changes to the comp plan, which I understand would be years down the road, as we approach that, we could change this time frame at some point in the future.
Right, or depending on the code changes you're considering, there's moratoriums that could go into effect to forestall something getting approved when we know it's going to be impacted by the kinds of things that might be under consideration at that time. But I don't think a comp plan are the kinds of things that a moratorium would need to be involved with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments by council? Great question. Roll call, please.
Harmson,
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Alter,
Yes.
Burgess,
Yes.
Dunn.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item number 10E, setting fines for criminal disorderly house violations. Ordinance amending Title 8 entitled Police Regulations, Chapter 5 entitled Miscellaneous Offenses to specify the criminal penalty for disorderly house violations. This is the second consideration. Could I get a motion, please?
So moved. Alter.
Second, Thomas.
Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one in person or online, council discussion? Roll call, please.
Taylor,
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
I do apologize.
have a-
I had a question because I was looking at. Sorry, let me get to the right page. This is my own faulty memory. Did we land on just keeping the fines as were proposed, or because I know we had a long discussion and I thought we had actually moved them down slightly.
there was quite a bit of discussion, but the council eventually settled on just keeping them as
Okay.
was.
Okay. Thank you for the reminder. I apologize for
That's
my
fine.
memory.
No worries. Roll call, please.
Taylor,
Yes.
Teague,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Alter,
Yes.
Burgess,
No.
Dunn,
Yes.
Harmson.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-1. Item number 10F, adding new fee for electric vehicle charging. Ordinance amendment Title 3, Finances, Taxation, and Fees, Chapter 4, Schedule of Fees, Rates, Charges, Bonds, Fines, and Penalties, Section 8, Parking, to add a new fee for electric vehicle charging. This is the second consideration. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved, Burgess?
Second. Alter.
All right, and welcome.
Hello, everyone. Mark Rummel, Associate Director for Transportation Services. So Darian explained this item for you a couple weeks ago. There was just a couple questions that popped up, so I was here to try and help answer some of those. One question was about the 16-cent fee per kilowatt hour and just a breakdown of that. So that will break down to 9 cents for the electricity, 4 cents, this is by kilowatt hour, 4 cents for the charge point fees that we'll be paying them, and 3 cents for the state tax. That's the new tax that is kind of the drive on this one. Another question was just kind of a breakdown of what a parker will experience for charge, I guess, on this. So if someone parks for 4 hours, which right now our maximum limits are 4 hours in each of these spots, a 4-hour session will cost the driver $4, and that breakdown would be $2.25 for the electricity, $1 for the charge point fees, and 75 cents for the tax. So in addition to the fee for the electricity, basically, we also charge a fee for the parking. So depending on where they're parked, if it's one of our gated facilities, that's the first hour's free, and then it's $1 an hour after that. So again, if someone's there 4 hours, if they go over that 4 hours, well, if they're there 4 hours, it'll be the $3 fee for parking. If they go slightly over that, it'd be $4. The other two facilities that are not gated, the Chauncey Swan facility and the Harrison Street, are 75 cents an hour. So again, a 4-hour charge on that would be $3. Another question was about the breakdown for the kilowatt hours. I think it was just kind of the charging breakdown. So just kind of rough numbers on this one. If it's a plug-in hybrid, those would be, and that's a vehicle that has gas power and electricity combination. So that would be about a 2 to 4 hour charge to get it to 100%. Where an all battery vehicle, it depends on the vehicle and the battery sizes, but they could get between like a 30 and 60% charge over that same 4-hour span. And the plug-in hybrids usually get about 25 to 50 miles on that range, where the all battery is more like an 80 to 100 mile, just again, depending on the vehicle itself. I think those were the specific questions from the last council meeting. I'm happy to help answer any other questions if anyone has any.
I just have kind of a crazy question showing my lack of knowledge on the exact state tax rules. Now, we have our charging stations that we have our electric vehicles plugged into. Are we paying ourselves for the electricity? We probably have to pay that state tax then on those charging stations and our vehicles. How's that going to work?
My memory is that if it's for kind of fleet use for your own vehicle, that they're not. And I believe that those charges are all separate.
Okay.
Is that right?
Right. Yep. As far as I understand too, it's public charging stations, and it is not something that we pay for the city fleet vehicles either. So.
Right. So in summary, we don't pay the tax to charge our own vehicles in our own dedicated chargers. But if we were to pull in for whatever reason in one of those public spots to charge one of our vehicles, we would be paying tax.
Okay. Thank you.
Because there's a place where we're selling.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Well, and frankly, even if we were giving it away, we would still be charged that tax.
The tax. Right.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I think you're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone from the public like to address this topic? See no one in person or online. Council discussion.
This is one of those like issues that this hits me as very strange, because we're in a state that like subsidizes to a great deal ethanol, and without saying whether for or against that, it seems a little bit annoying to me that the state is putting this tax on when something that's greener than ethanol, I think, for the most part. And then so kind of going back and forth, like on one hand, it's about $10,000, I think, a year was, if I remember that number right from the discussions and from the materials. I don't know. It's not that I think we're doing the wrong thing. It just annoys me to be put in the place of doing it, having to do it in the first place. And so kind of hoping that, it's just a weird thing that function of being in the state of Iowa, I guess, that they're putting this on electric vehicles, and yet we spend oodles of money on ethanol. Under the logic of it being a renewable fuel, it seems a little bit annoying that the state is like now going to be charging for this instead of just subsidizing it with the huge surplus we hear about in Des Moines.
If I may, just everything you said is true. But since the public works folks, or well, only one public works folks person is still here, if they were here, they would probably point out that we are the beneficiaries of much of that road use tax. And as the shift goes from gasoline powered vehicles to electric vehicles, we would otherwise, that fund would be depleted, right, and diminishing.
And a fair point. But
Yeah.
we do subsidize through the tax on the pump, the state.
Yeah.
This is kind of what I'm saying. So yes, no, that's a fair point and well taken.
Roll call, please.
Teague?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Alter?
Yes.
Burgess?
Yes.
Dunn?
Yes.
Harmson?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item number 10G, Home ARP Amendment Number 2 to fiscal year 2021 Annual Action Plan. Resolution approving substantial amendment number 2 to Iowa City's fiscal year 2021 Annual Action Plan. And could I get a motion to approve, please?
So moved, Thomas.
Second, Burgess.
All right, and welcome.
Hello, Cassandra Pearson, Grant Specialist. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 allocated home ARP funds to address the needs of households experiencing homelessness and other at-risk and vulnerable populations. The City of Iowa City was allocated just under $1.8 million in home ARP funds to carry out those same activities. Substantial Amendment Number 1, containing the initial draft of the home ARP allocation plan, was reviewed and subsequently approved by Council August 16th of 2022, so almost 1 year ago to the day. After review by HUD, we received recommendations for modifications specifically in the prioritization and preferences section, just for clarification, as well as the needs and gaps analysis, again, just for clarification of some of the pieces there for compliance. There's no modifications to any funding recommendations or actual implementation of the program. However, those changes, as mentioned, are presented to you today.
Great.
Thank you. Happy to
Any
answer
questions for Cassandra? Hearing none, thank you. Anyone from the public like to address this topic? Seeing no one in person or online, council discussion. Roll call, please.
Thomas?
Yes.
Alter?
Yes.
Burgess?
Yes.
Dunn?
Yes.
Harmson?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Teague?
Yes, motion passes 7-0. Item number 11 is announcements of vacancies new. 11A is announced Climate Action Commission, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Could I get a motion to, I'm sorry, before I do that. So Climate Action Commission, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term upon appointment through December 31st, 2025. Can I get a motion to accept correspondence?
So moved, Alter.
Second, Burgess.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Item number 12 is announcements of vacancies previous. And 12A is going to be Community Police Review Board, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Applications must be received by 5 p.m. Tuesday, August 29, 2023. Housing and Community Development Commission, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Parks and Recreation Commission, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Applicants must be received by 5 p.m. Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. Historic Preservation Commission, East College Street, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Historic Preservation Commission, Jefferson Street, 1 vacancy to fill a 3-year term. Historic Preservation Commission, Woodlawn Avenue, 1 vacancy to fill an unexpired term. Vacancies will remain open until filled. Item number 13 is City Council information.
I just had one item, a plug for the Diversity Market final market this Saturday. I believe it is, isn't it? Two more. Okay. Second to last. Whew, sorry. Missed the last one. Got confused. We will be having our transit staff and some volunteers. I know I'm volunteering. I don't know if other counselors are volunteering to help table to promote our fare-free transit at the market. And that will be for the full duration of the market. And we will also be having a city council listening post from 5 to 7 at the market.
Great.
I just learned some sad news earlier today. Carolyn Dieterle passed away, who I kind of think of as a sort of a permanent fixture in Iowa City, and I think all of us that know her or that knew her are very saddened by that, and so I just wanted to mention that to you.
Nothing?
I was just going to say that I think it is well sold out by this point, but the Farm to Street celebration is going to be in the North Side Marketplace this Thursday for those who want to get amazing food and good company. Additionally, that same night, there is kind of a get-together sponsored by 4Cs out at Urban Acres, and they just do tremendous work in the area regarding childcare, and so if anyone is interested in that, that's going to be going on at the same time on Thursday out at Urban Acres. So lots of stuff going on, even in the late August.
Yes. And of course, the students are back, so welcome to the students and faculty.
And U-Hauls.
And
The
U-Hauls, yes. Rockstar Parking has officially ended. All right.
Yeah.
On to item number 14, reports from our city staff, city manager's office.
Nothing for you this evening?
City attorney office.
Nothing for me, thank you.
And our city clerk's office.
Nothing today. Thanks.
All right, well, we're on to item number 15. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Taylor, seconded by Burgess. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. Have a good evening. Yes.